Once upon a time in the quaint town of Willow Creek, lived a man named Thomas, known for his unwavering confidence and gentle demeanor. Thomas was a craftsman, renowned for his intricate woodwork, which brought beauty and warmth to the homes of the townsfolk. He was married to Clara, a woman whose laughter was as infectious as the spring breeze. Together, they appeared to have a life painted in the hues of contentment and love. Thomas was not just a man of skill but also of strong character. His confidence wasn't loud or brash but resonated in his quiet strength, the kind that made you feel safe just by being around him. He was the type of person who could calm a storm with a single, reassuring word. The couple lived in a modest house on the edge of town, surrounded by a garden that Clara tended with love, each flower blooming under her care. Life seemed to flow like a gentle river, unmarred by the rocks of misfortune, until one fateful day when the first cracks began to show. It was during the annual town festival, a celebration of harvest under the golden hues of autumn, when Thomas noticed a change in Clara. Her eyes, which usually sparkled with joy when she saw him, now flickered with something else, guilt, perhaps? He observed her from afar, laughing a bit too freely with Officer Michael, the new policeman in town, whose uniform seemed to catch the light a bit too much for Thomas's liking. There was an ease in their interactions, a comfort that suggested familiarity beyond what should be. Thomas, ever the observant, felt a tug at his heart, a premonition of betrayal that whispered in his ear. But in his confidence, he brushed it off, trusting in the bond he thought was unbreakable. Little did he know, this was only the beginning of a series of unexpected events that would challenge his spirit, his love, and his resolve. The festival's laughter and music continued, but for Thomas, the melody had shifted to a tone of discord, a prelude to the storm that was about to engulf his life. Days turned into weeks, and the seed of doubt that had planted itself in Thomas's mind began to sprout. Clara's behavior grew more distant. Her smiles were now forced, her laughter less frequent. Thomas, although confident, was not blind to the signs. He decided to confront the situation with the same calm and collectedness that defined him. One evening, after a particularly long day at his workshop, Thomas came home to find Clara on the phone. Her voice was hushed, almost secretive. When she saw him, she quickly ended the call, her face a mask of surprise and guilt. Thomas, with a steady voice, asked, "Clara, is there something you need to tell me?" Clara's eyes darted away, her hands fidgeting with the edge of her apron. "It's nothing, Thomas, just a friend," she stammered. But Thomas knew, the signs were too clear, the air too thick with unspoken words. The next day, Thomas decided to follow Clara, something he never thought he would do. He watched from a distance as she met Officer Michael at the park, their hands touching briefly, their conversation intimate. The sight was like a punch to his gut, yet he remained composed, his mind racing for answers rather than breaking into rage. That night, after Clara had gone to bed, Thomas sat at the kitchen table, his thoughts a whirlwind. He knew he needed to confront this betrayal head-on but with dignity. He decided to speak to Michael himself, hoping for some shred of explanation or perhaps even a denial that could restore his crumbling world. The following morning, Thomas went to the police station under the pretense of reporting a minor theft at his workshop. There, he found Michael, who greeted him with a friendly but wary smile. "Officer Michael," Thomas began, his voice steady, "I need to speak with you about something personal." Michael's face changed, the color draining from it as if he knew exactly what was coming. In that small, quiet office, Thomas laid out his observations, his voice never rising, his eyes never leaving Michael's face. Michael, perhaps out of respect for Thomas's calm demeanor or out of sheer shock, confessed, "Thomas, I'm sorry. It was not supposed to go this far. Clara, she's carrying my child." The room seemed to tilt, the world shrinking to the space between them. Thomas felt the weight of betrayal, yet his response was measured, his mind already racing towards the next steps. He left the station with a plan forming, one that would not only seek justice but would also test the limits of his own heart. The walk back from the police station felt like a journey through a different dimension for Thomas. Each step echoed the heavy thud of his heart, a heart that was now both broken and ignited with a resolve he hadn't known he possessed. The town of Willow Creek, with its familiar streets and friendly faces, seemed to look at him differently, or perhaps it was he who saw everything through new, disillusioned eyes. Thomas returned home to find Clara in the kitchen, her back to him as she prepared dinner. The scent of roast chicken, which usually filled him with warmth, now felt like an intrusion on his raw emotions. He watched her for a moment, her movements graceful yet deceitful in his new perception. How could the woman who once was his everything now be the source of such profound pain? "Clara." Thomas's voice was firm, carrying a tone that made her turn abruptly. There was no warmth in his eyes, only the cold, hard truth of what he now knew. "We need to talk." Clara's face paled, her hands clasping together as if they could hold back the flood of confessions. "Thomas, No, Clara. Let me speak," he interrupted, his voice steady despite the storm inside him. "I visited Michael today. I know about the baby. I know everything." The silence that followed was heavier than any words could be. Clara's eyes filled with tears, her body trembling as if the truth had physically struck her. "I'm so sorry, Thomas. I never meant for this to happen. It was a mistake, a moment of weakness," she pleaded, her voice breaking. Thomas listened, his mind dissecting each word for sincerity, yet finding only remnants of the love they once shared. "How long, Clara? How long have you been betraying us?" His question was not angry, but it carried the weight of a judge passing sentence. "It started a few months ago," Clara confessed, her voice barely a whisper. "I was lonely, Thomas. You were always so absorbed in your work. I didn't mean to fall in love with him." The word love struck Thomas like a betrayal anew. Love was supposed to be sacred between them, not something to be divided or shared with another. He took a deep breath, his mind racing to keep his emotions in check. "And the baby?" he asked, his voice betraying a hint of pain. "It's his," Clara admitted, tears streaming down her face. "I wanted to tell you, but I was so scared." Thomas nodded, his mind already moving beyond the shock to the logistics of what was to come. "We will need to figure out what happens next. But know this, Clara, we will not continue as we were. This changes everything." Leaving Clara in the kitchen with her sorrow, Thomas walked out into the night. The cool air did little to soothe the turmoil inside him. He walked aimlessly, his thoughts a chaotic mix of betrayal, love, vengeance, and loss. The moon above seemed to judge him, casting long shadows that felt like the ghosts of his past life. As he wandered, his path led him to the old oak tree at the edge of town, a place where he and Clara had once carved their initials into the bark, a symbol of their undying love. Now, it felt like a mockery. He sat down, his back against the rough bark, staring into the night sky. It was here that Thomas began to formulate his plan. Not out of anger, but from a place of strategic calm. He would not let this destroy him. He would rise above it. He would ensure that justice was served, not just for himself, but for the integrity of what their marriage once represented. His plan was complex, weaving through legalities, emotions, and the very fabric of their small community. He would need allies, perhaps from unexpected corners of Willow Creek. He would start by gathering evidence, every letter, every phone call, every whispered conversation at the market. He would document it all, with the precision he applied to his woodwork. But beyond the legal battle, Thomas thought of the child. An innocent life caught in this web of deceit. He pondered his role, his responsibility. Could he be a father to a child that was not his by blood but was conceived in the shadow of his own home? These thoughts wrestled within him, pulling him between revenge and redemption. As dawn approached, Thomas felt the first whispers of a new resolve. He would not let this betrayal define him. Instead, he would use it to redefine his life, to build something new from the ashes of his old existence. He would confront Clara once more, but this time, with a plan not just for his vengeance, but for the future of all involved. With the first light of day, Thomas returned home, his mind clearer, his heart still heavy, but now with purpose. He would start his day as he always did, with the quiet confidence of a man who had faced the worst and was now preparing for a battle not just for himself, but for a semblance of justice in his shattered world. The next morning, the sun rose with a promise of normalcy that Thomas knew was far from reality. He went through the motions of his routine: breakfast, a brief, strained conversation with Clara, and then off to his workshop. But today, his hands moved with less passion over the wood. His mind was elsewhere, piecing together the fragments of his new life plan. In his workshop, surrounded by tools and the scent of fresh wood, Thomas set up a small corner for his new mission. He had bought a small digital recorder, a camera with a telephoto lens, and gathered all the old letters and notes Clara had received. He would not confront her without an arsenal of undeniable proof. His confidence was not in anger but in the meticulous gathering of facts. First, Thomas reviewed the letters, many of which were hidden in an old jewelry box Clara kept in their bedroom. He read each one with a heavy heart, noting dates, phrases, and the progression of their affair. Each letter was a piece of the puzzle, showing how the betrayal had woven itself into the fabric of their life together. Next, he turned his attention to gathering new evidence. He knew Clara met Michael at the park every Wednesday afternoon. With his camera, he took discreet photos from a distance. Each click of the shutter was like a hammer strike on his own heart, but he continued, documenting their meetings, their laughter, and the gentle touches that once belonged to him alone. The recorder was for the more subtle moments. He placed it in various locations around the house, capturing snippets of conversation when Clara thought she was alone. There were confessions, promises, and plans for the future that did not include him. It was painful, but necessary. Thomas also began to engage more with the community, not just for evidence, but to understand the pulse of Willow Creek. He visited places where gossip flowed like water, the cafe, the barber shop, and even the local library. People talked. They always did. And through their words, he learned more than he wished about Clara's movements, her secrets, and the town's view on her affair with Michael. One afternoon, while sipping coffee at the cafe, Thomas overheard a conversation that chilled him. Two women were discussing Clara's pregnancy, speculating about the father. One of them, Mrs. Henderson, a known gossip, whispered, "I always knew she was too friendly with that new policeman. It's a scandal, I tell you." This public acknowledgement of the affair spurred Thomas into action. He realized that if the town knew, then his investigation needed to be legally sound. He consulted with an old friend, attorney Lisa Matthews, under the guise of needing advice on property law, but soon the conversation shifted to personal matters. "Thomas, if you're gathering evidence for a divorce, you need to be careful," Lisa advised him, her eyes showing concern. "Make sure it's all legally admissible. And remember, this isn't just about proving infidelity now. It's about protecting yourself, your assets, and considering the child's rights." Her words echoed in Thomas's mind as he left her office. He needed to be strategic. He decided to compile all his evidence into a dossier, documenting everything from dates to locations, from phone calls to personal notes. He would present this to Lisa when he was ready to proceed with legal action. However, Thomas's heart wasn't solely set on destruction. He thought about the child, the innocent life caught in this mess. He visited the local library, researching child custody laws, adoption rights, and the psychological impact of divorce on children. He wanted to ensure that if he couldn't be this child's father in the biological sense, he could at least be a guardian, a protector in some capacity. As weeks turned into a month, Thomas's collection grew, both in evidence and in his understanding of the legal landscape ahead. He had managed to keep his demeanor calm, his interactions with Clara polite but distant. Each night, he worked late, his workshop now a dual-purpose space for both creation and destruction. One evening, as he was about to leave his workshop, he received an unexpected visitor. It was Officer Martin, a colleague of Michael's, known for his integrity. "Thomas, I heard some things," Martin began, his voice low. "I know about Clara and Michael. I thought you should know. Michael's been bragging about it at the station. I wanted to apologize on behalf of the force." This unexpected ally gave Thomas pause. He was an insider, someone who could perhaps help him navigate the police aspect of his plan, or at least ensure Michael didn't twist the narrative. They talked for hours, planning, strategizing, and forming an unlikely alliance. By the end of that night, Thomas felt a mix of emotions: relief at having an ally, sadness for what his life had become, and a fierce determination to see his plan through. He was no longer just the betrayed husband. He was now a man on a mission for justice, for himself, and for the unborn child who deserved better than to be a pawn in this painful game. As autumn deepened into winter, the town of Willow Creek was draped in a frosty silence that mirrored Thomas's own internal chill. His daily life was a facade of normalcy, but behind the calm exterior, he was orchestrating a complex game of chess, with each move calculated to bring about an outcome that was just. With Officer Martin's help, Thomas began to subtly undermine Michael's standing within the community and the police force. Martin, feeling a sense of moral obligation, started to document any misconduct or unprofessional behavior by Michael, whether it was related to the affair or not. This included instances where Michael was less than diligent on duty, or when he used his position to gain personal favors. Meanwhile, Thomas continued his meticulous documentation, now with an added layer of legal consultation from Lisa Matthews. She advised him on how to prepare for a court case, ensuring that his evidence was not only comprehensive, but also presented in a manner that would hold up in court. They discussed everything from character witnesses to the potential implications of Clara's pregnancy on custody arrangements. One crisp morning, Thomas decided it was time to confront Clara with his findings, not with rage, but with the quiet authority of a man who had everything in order. He invited her to the workshop, under the pretense of discussing their future. When she arrived, her face showed signs of confusion and hope, perhaps thinking this was a step toward reconciliation. "Clara, sit down," Thomas said, his voice steady, his gaze unwavering. He spread out his collection of evidence across the workbench. Photos, letters, recordings, all labeled and dated. Clara's eyes widened, her hands reaching to touch the evidence, but she pulled back as if burned. Thomas, I didn't think you knew all this, she whispered, her voice laced with fear. I know everything, Thomas replied, his tone not harsh but definitive. This isn't just about us anymore, Clara. There's a child involved. We need to discuss how we're going to handle this legally, fairly, for everyone. The discussion that followed was painful, filled with tears and denials from Clara, but Thomas remained composed, guiding the conversation towards practicalities. They talked about custody, about living arrangements, about how to explain this to the town. Clara was reluctant, clinging to the hope of salvaging their relationship, but Thomas made it clear that trust was irrevocably broken. After Clara left, emotionally drained, Thomas felt a surge of resolve. His next move was to visit Michael personally, but this time not in confrontation, but with the quiet power of someone holding all the cards. He went to the police station, asking to speak with Michael under the guise of discussing a misunderstanding. In the privacy of a small interview room, Thomas laid out his intentions. Michael, I have no interest in a public scandal, he began, his voice low and controlled, but I will not stand by while my life is dismantled. Here's what's going to happen. You will resign from your position. You will agree to whatever custody arrangement ensures the child's well-being, and you will leave Willow Creek. Michael, caught completely off guard, tried to argue, to threaten, but Thomas's calm, relentless logic and the tangible evidence before him silenced any defense. If you refuse, I'll make sure this evidence goes not just to the courts but to every newspaper in the state. Your career, your reputation, everything will be over. With no real choice, Michael agreed, his face pale, his voice subdued. When do you want this done? He asked, defeated. By the end of the week, Thomas replied, standing to leave. I'll have Lisa draw up the agreements. As Thomas left the station, he felt the weight of his actions. He wasn't just protecting himself. He was shaping the future of a child and ensuring that justice was served in a way that preserved some dignity for all involved. But this was just the beginning of his chess game. Back in town, Thomas started to work on another aspect of his plan: community support. He subtly began to reshape his public image from the betrayed husband to a man of integrity, wronged but not vengeful. He volunteered more, engaged with local charities, and even started teaching woodworking to kids at the community center, earning respect and sympathy. His strategy was working. Whispers of his nobility in handling the situation spread. People who once might have judged him now saw him as a pillar of strength, someone who was wronged but rose above it. This public perception would be crucial when the legal battles began. As the week closed, Michael resigned, and the news rippled through Willow Creek. Thomas felt a bittersweet victory. The first major piece of his plan had moved into place, but the board was still vast, with many more moves to come. He knew the game was far from over, but for the first time since the betrayal, he felt he was not just reacting but directing the course of events. With Michael's resignation and the initial shockwaves through Willow Creek, Thomas turned his full attention to the legal aspects of his situation. The chess game had entered a new phase, one where every move needed to be legally airtight and strategically sound. Thomas met with Lisa Matthews again, this time with a stack of documents and a clear agenda. Lisa, we need to file for divorce, and I want to ensure we handle the custody situation with the utmost care, he said, laying out his notes. Lisa nodded, her expression one of professional empathy. Thomas, given the circumstances, you have a strong case for divorce on the grounds of adultery. But custody is where it gets complicated. We'll need to focus on what's best for the child, not just legally but morally. They spent hours poring over precedents, discussing potential outcomes, and preparing for every possible counterargument Clara or her legal representation might bring. Thomas wanted a divorce that was as amicable as possible under the circumstances, focusing on co-parenting rather than punishing Clara. However, he knew that Clara might not see it the same way. She might fight back, using emotional manipulation or her connection with Michael as leverage. Thomas was prepared for this. He had already gathered character witnesses from the community, people who could testify to his integrity and commitment to the child's welfare. The paperwork was filed, and the news of the divorce proceedings spread like wildfire through Willow Creek. Thomas was ready for the public's eye, having already shaped his narrative through his recent community involvement. Yet, he knew the legal battle would be the real test of his strategy. The first court hearing was scheduled, and Thomas arrived with Lisa, his demeanor calm but his mind racing. Clara was there, accompanied by her lawyer, a sharp-looking woman from the city named Eleanor Vance, known for her aggressive defense tactics. The judge, an older woman named Judge Margaret Sorensen, known for her no-nonsense approach, called the court to order. "We're here today for the matter of Thomas versus Clara Winston," she announced. "Let's begin with the grounds for divorce." Lisa presented their case clearly and concisely, highlighting the evidence of infidelity without malice. Eleanor, however, painted a picture of Clara as a woman caught in a moment of weakness, urging the court to consider the emotional distress and the implications of the pregnancy. The session was intense, with both sides presenting their views on custody. Thomas argued for shared custody, emphasizing his ability to provide a stable, loving environment, backed by testimonials from community members. Eleanor countered with Clara's maternal rights and the emotional bond she had already formed with the unborn child. As the session drew to a close, Judge Sorensen seemed contemplative. "This court will take all evidence and testimonies into consideration. We will reconvene next month for a decision on custody arrangements. Until then, I suggest both parties act in the best interest of the child." Leaving the courtroom, Thomas felt the weight of the battle ahead. He knew this was just the beginning, but every piece of his plan was falling into place. He decided to visit the community center, where he was volunteering, to clear his mind and reconnect with the real reason behind his fight: the children, including the one Clara was carrying. At the center, while teaching a woodworking class, Thomas was approached by Mrs. Henderson, the same gossip who had spoken about Clara's affair. "Thomas, I've seen how you've handled this. You're a good man, and that child, no matter what, will need you," she said, her tone surprisingly supportive. This interaction gave Thomas hope. If he could win over someone like Mrs. Henderson, perhaps he could sway more of the community in his favor, which might influence the court's perception. Back at home, Thomas received a call from Officer Martin. "I've kept an ear out since Michael left. There's been talk at the station about how he was. It's not good. I think if we can bring this up, it might help your case," Martin informed him. Thomas thanked him, realizing that this could be a pivotal piece of information. He updated Lisa, who agreed to explore how this could legally impact their case, possibly showing Michael's character in a negative light, which could reflect on Clara's judgment. Over the next weeks, Thomas balanced his life between his workshop, community service, and legal preparations. He was now not only fighting for his rights, but also for a future where he could be part of the child's life, regardless of the biological father. The chess game was complex, with many moves left, but Thomas was playing with a heart that sought not just justice, but healing for all involved. As the days ticked closer to the next court date, Thomas found himself in a whirlwind of preparation, his days filled with work, legal strategy sessions, and community engagement. However, life in Willow Creek was about to throw him another curveball, one that would alter his game plan. One evening, while Thomas was reviewing documents in his workshop, he heard a soft knock at the door. It was unusual for anyone to visit this late, especially given the recent events. Opening the door, he was surprised to see Clara's younger sister, Emily, standing there, her expression a mix of anxiety and determination. "Thomas, can we talk?" Emily asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Thomas, though wary, nodded and invited her inside. Emily had always been close to Clara but had kept her distance since the affair came to light. Her presence now was both unexpected and intriguing. "I know you're probably wondering why I'm here," Emily began, taking a seat on one of the wooden stools. "I've been silent too long, Thomas. I knew about Clara and Michael, and I didn't say anything. I thought it might just be a phase, but I was wrong." Thomas listened, his heart heavy but his mind curious about her intentions. "Why tell me now, Emily?" he asked, his tone neutral. "I can't stand by anymore. Clara's made her choices, and while I love her, I can't ignore what's right. You've always been good to her, to all of us. I want to help, Thomas, if you'll let me." Emily's offer was unexpected but could prove invaluable. She had insights into Clara's behavior, her meetings with Michael, and even some financial dealings that might not stand up in court. Thomas realized that Emily could be the key to understanding Clara's state of mind and perhaps even swaying public and judicial opinion. "Thank you, Emily. Your help would mean a lot," Thomas said, feeling a cautious optimism. They spent the next hour discussing details, with Emily providing additional pieces of evidence that could strengthen Thomas's case without further damaging Clara's image in the eyes of the community or the court. With this new ally, Thomas updated Lisa Matthews, who was initially skeptical but soon saw the strategic advantage. "This could really help us, Thomas." Emily's testimony, especially about Clara's state before and after the affair, could paint a more sympathetic picture of you, Lisa explained. The next day, Thomas and Emily met with Lisa, where they outlined Emily's potential testimony. It wasn't just about proving Clara's infidelity. It was about showing Thomas's character in contrast, his willingness to forgive, his commitment to the child, and his desire for an amicable solution despite the betrayal. Meanwhile, Thomas decided to leverage this new development in another way. He organized a small community event at the center, inviting people to join in a woodworking project for charity. His aim was twofold: to continue fostering goodwill and to subtly introduce Emily as someone who supported his side of the story, not out of spite, but out of a sense of justice. The event was a success, with many from Willow Creek participating. Emily's presence and her open support for Thomas subtly shifted some opinions. People began to see the situation not just as a scandal, but as a complex human story where both sides had their merits and faults. However, the real test came when Thomas received a call from Eleanor Vance, Clara's lawyer. "Mr. Winston, my client wishes to discuss a potential settlement out of court," she said, her voice crisp and professional. Thomas, with Lisa by his side, agreed to meet. In the mediation room, Clara was visibly different, more subdued, and perhaps influenced by Emily's decision to speak out. The discussion was tense but civil. Clara, guided by Eleanor, proposed a shared custody agreement, acknowledging Thomas's role in the child's life, even if not biological. "We want to ensure the child knows both parents, Thomas. Clara wants you to be part of this, as do I," Eleanor said, looking between them. Thomas felt a mix of emotions. While part of him wanted to fight to the end, another part recognized the offer as a step towards healing. They discussed terms, focusing on the child's well-being, visitation rights, and how they would handle public perception. By the end of the meeting, a tentative agreement was reached, which would need to be formalized in court. Thomas felt a strange sense of peace. This wasn't the revenge he might have once imagined, but it felt more like justice, not just for him, but for everyone involved. As they left the mediation room, Emily squeezed his hand, a silent thank you for not making this harder on her sister than it already was. Thomas knew the game wasn't over, but with Emily's unexpected support and this new agreement, he felt they were moving towards a checkmate where everyone could find some peace. The tentative agreement between Thomas and Clara was a significant turning point, but he knew the game was far from over. The court would still need to approve their settlement, and public opinion, while shifting, could sway back if not carefully managed. Thomas and Lisa prepared for the final court session with renewed vigor. With Emily's testimony now part of their strategy, they felt more confident. Emily's support wasn't just about adding evidence. It was about humanizing the situation, showing that even family members recognized Thomas's integrity and commitment. In court, the atmosphere was charged with anticipation. Judge Sorensen called the session to order, and the proceedings began. Clara's lawyer, Eleanor, presented the settlement agreement, emphasizing the mutual desire for co-parenting and stability for the child. Then came Emily's moment. She spoke with a clarity and emotion that captured the room's attention. "Your Honor, I've known Thomas as a brother, and I've seen his dedication not just to my sister, but to everyone in his life. He deserves to be part of this child's life, not just because it's legally right, but because it's morally just." Her words struck a chord, not just with the judge, but with the onlookers in the courtroom. Thomas watched, feeling a mixture of gratitude and relief. Emily's testimony was the human element they needed, showcasing a narrative of forgiveness and family unity beyond the betrayal. After Emily, Lisa presented Thomas's contributions to the community, his readiness to support the child regardless of biology, and his stable, loving environment. The evidence from Officer Martin about Michael's conduct was also brought up, subtly discrediting any potential counterarguments from Clara's side. Judge Sorensen, after listening to both sides, took a moment to reflect. It's clear to this court that both parties are committed to the child's welfare, albeit in different ways. Given the evidence and testimonies, I approve the settlement as presented, with the stipulation for regular reviews to ensure it remains in the child's best interest. The gavel fell, marking not just the end of the session, but a new beginning for Thomas. He felt a weight lift off his shoulders, but he knew the real challenge was now to live up to the promises made in court, to co-parent effectively with Clara, and to navigate this new chapter of his life. With the legal battles behind him, Thomas focused on rebuilding his life, both personally and within the community. The child was born, a little girl named Amelia, and true to the court's ruling, Thomas was actively involved in her life. He and Clara managed to find a rhythm, focusing on Amelia's needs rather than their past grievances. Thomas continued his work at the workshop, which had become a place of solace and community gathering. He started a program where he taught woodworking to single parents and their children, turning his personal healing into a community service. This initiative not only helped mend his image, but also solidified his place as a pillar in Willow Creek. Clara, on her part, moved back to her family's home on the outskirts of town, where Emily provided support. Their interactions were polite, centered around Amelia. Clara had started a small business, a flower shop, which symbolized her attempt at a fresh start. Michael had left Willow Creek, his reputation tarnished enough that finding another position in law enforcement proved challenging. Thomas didn't revel in this. Instead, he focused on the positive, on raising Amelia to know kindness and integrity. As Amelia grew, the town watched, many expecting drama but instead witnessing a story of resilience and forgiveness. Thomas and Clara even managed to attend community events together, presenting a united front for their daughter's sake. One day, during a town festival, Thomas found himself laughing with Clara as Amelia chased fireflies. It wasn't forgiveness in the traditional sense, but acceptance of their new reality, where past hurts were not forgotten but were no longer the center of their lives. Years turned the pages of life in Willow Creek, and with time, Thomas found not just peace but a new kind of love. He met Sarah, a teacher at the local school, who appreciated his strength and dedication to Amelia. Their relationship was built on mutual respect and shared values, offering Thomas a chance at personal happiness he thought was lost. Clara, too, found her way, meeting someone who respected her journey and her role as a mother. Their new partners became part of the extended family, all focusing on Amelia's well-being, showing her that love and family could take many forms. On Amelia's 10th birthday, at a gathering in the community center, Thomas gave a speech, not about his past trials, but about gratitude and community. We've all learned that life's not about the pieces we lose in the game, but how we play with what we have left. Here's to new beginnings, to family, and to the love we choose to build. As the crowd cheered, Thomas looked at Clara, their partners, Amelia, and the friends who had supported him through his darkest times. He realized that his quest for justice had led him to something far greater, a life enriched by love, understanding, and the unexpected beauty of second chances. In the end, Thomas's revenge was not in tearing down but in building up, creating a legacy of hope and unity in Willow Creek. His story was no longer about betrayal but about the resilience of the human spirit, the power of forgiveness, and the art of moving forward, piece by piece, into a future shaped by the love one chooses to give.